The chandeliers above cast their golden light across marble floors polished to a mirror finish. Each table gleamed with silver cutlery and crystal glasses, the kind of restaurant where money was not only spent but displayed. The air smelled of roasted duck, garlic butter, and expensive wine, an atmosphere designed to assure the wealthy that they were in the right place. Every detail whispered luxury, from the hushed piano in the corner to the discreet staff gliding silently between tables. At one of those tables sat Victor Reinhardt, a man who demanded attention without ever asking for it. His voice carried over the low hum of the restaurant, rich with self-importance, booming in laughter that was just a bit too loud, timed to ensure no one could ignore him. He wore a suit cut to perfection, a dark blue tailored so precisely it seemed sewn onto his frame. A Rolex caught the chandelier light with every movement of his hand. His hair was slicked back, silver at the temples, the cultivated look of a man who wanted to appear timeless. Across from him sat two business associates, one American, one French, both leaning toward him with eager nods, laughing a second too late at his jokes. Amara approached their table carrying a tray balanced with one hand. She walked with the kind of grace that came from years of practice, every movement economical, smooth, controlled. Her black hair was pulled back neatly, her uniform crisp, though not expensive. She had grown used to being invisible in rooms like this, a shadow who refilled glasses, delivered food, smiled politely, and slipped away before anyone truly noticed her. But she noticed everything, the way money draped itself over shoulders like armor, the way people like Victor used arrogance as seasoning for their meals. When she reached the table, she lowered the tray slightly and set down the bottle of Bordeaux. Her smile was polite, professional, the same smile she had given to every other customer that night. But the moment her hand touched the tablecloth, Victor's eyes landed on her, and a smirk tugged at his lips. He looked her up and down, slowly, deliberately, before leaning back in his chair as though the very sight of her confirmed something he already believed. "Well, finally," he said in English, his accent thick and purposeful, as if each word should carry weight simply because he had spoken it. Then, turning to his companions, he switched to German, lowering his voice only slightly, enough to suggest he thought it safe. Asterisk. Look at this. They let anyone work in places like this now. Imagine paying hundreds for dinner and being served by someone who probably can't understand a word we're saying. Asterisk. The American associate let out a small chuckle, the kind born from discomfort rather than humor. The Frenchman smiled awkwardly, unsure of whether to join in or stay silent. Victor didn't care which they chose. He raised his voice a little more, adding asterisk. Service staff should know their place. You pay them to smile and walk away, not to exist as anything more. Asterisk. Amara's hand tightened slightly on the tray. She understood every syllable. The precision of his German, though practiced, carried an arrogance that grated on her nerves. But she didn't let her expression change. Her eyes stayed neutral, her smile remained professional. Years of discipline allowed her to bury the burn in her chest, that mix of anger and insult. She poured the wine carefully, her wrist steady. Victor leaned toward his associates, muttering another comment in German, louder this time, something about asterisk. How amusing it was to watch people pretend to belong in places far above their station. Asterisk. The table laughed again, though it was the brittle kind of laughter that cracked under its own weight. Amara noticed the slight wince on the Frenchman's face, the way his eyes darted to her then quickly away. Still, no one said a word against Victor. His wealth, his influence, his presence seemed to silence everyone around him. Amara set the bottle down on the table with practiced precision, her movements smooth, unhurried, even though her pulse was beginning to drum in her ears. She didn't need to be told what men like Victor thought of her. She had seen it in their eyes countless times, assumptions drawn from the color of her skin, from the fact she wore an apron instead of a tailored suit, from the way she carried food instead of credit cards. But the casual cruelty of his words carried weight, not because they were new, but because of how easily he said them, how certain he was that she wouldn't understand. As she straightened, her gaze met his for a fraction of a second. It was enough for her to see the glimmer of amusement in his eyes, the arrogance of a man who believed himself untouchable. He smirked again, as if daring her to prove him wrong. Amara turned to leave, the tray tucked back under her arm. But she stopped. Something inside her, quiet for so long, stirred. She had tolerated insults before, ignored whispers spoken in languages people thought she didn't know. But tonight, in this restaurant filled with chandeliers and silk ties, with strangers pretending not to hear, something in Victor's tone made her blood heat in a way she couldn't suppress. She pivoted slowly, her expression calm, her smile almost gentle. Victor raised an eyebrow, as though expecting her to flinch, to retreat into silence like all the others had. Instead, she drew a slow breath, steadying her voice. The tray under her arm felt weightless now, her pulse steadying with each second of silence. And then, she opened her mouth. Her first word, when it came, was in German. Perfect. Crisp. Fluent. And in that moment, Victor's smirk froze. Her voice rang clear, smooth, every syllable precise. The words fell into the quiet like glass shattering. Asterisk. Your pronunciation is poor, Herr Reinhardt. Perhaps that is why you assume others cannot understand you. But I assure you, I understood every word. Asterisk. The effect was immediate. Conversations at nearby tables faltered mid-sentence. A fork clinked softly against a plate. Even the pianist in the corner stumbled over a note, fingers freezing as if the melody itself needed to pause for this moment. The two associates sitting with Victor looked at each other, their laughter strangled into silence. One blinked rapidly, as if unsure he had heard correctly, while the other shifted in his chair, staring at Amara with new eyes. Victor's smile faltered for the first time that evening. His lips parted slightly, but no words came out. The arrogance in his expression drained slowly, replaced by the faint shadow of something else, disbelief. Amara's eyes did not waver. They locked on his, steady, calm, unwavering. Her tone, when she continued, was not angry, not loud, but impossibly composed. I studied in Berlin for 6 years. Language, history, and economics. Before I worked here, I defended a thesis on cross-European trade policies, in German. The words sliced through the air sharper than any insult he had given her. People at nearby tables exchanged glances, the kind of look that traveled faster than whispers. Some leaned back to watch, others leaned forward, curious, caught in the magnetic pull of a moment that had shifted from private insult to public spectacle. The silence hung heavy. Victor tried to recover, to laugh it off. His lips curled back into a smile that no longer fit, a mask slipping on a face suddenly bare. Well, he said in English, forcing the joviality, his voice raised slightly as though volume could mask the tremor of uncertainty underneath. How impressive! A waitress with a degree. He let the word, waitress, linger, stretching it, filling it with venom, making sure everyone knew he intended to cut her down again. Then, slipping back into German, he sneered, asterisk. Let us see if she can keep balancing trays instead of books. Degrees mean nothing if you are pouring wine for the wealthy. Asterisk. The American associate winced. The Frenchman swallowed and shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The silence around the table thickened into something unmovable. Amara could feel the weight of every eye in the room pressing against her back. Yet she didn't falter. Her expression remained calm, but her voice cut through his mockery like steel drawn from a sheath. Balance, Herr Reinhardt, she said evenly, still in German, is something I see you know very little about. In business, or in dignity. The sentence landed with a sting so sharp that Victor's face tightened, his jaw clenching visibly. His associates avoided his eyes now, staring down into their glasses as if suddenly fascinated by reflections in the wine. The nearby diners exchanged hushed murmurs, the words slipping like currents of electricity from table to table. Victor leaned forward, his hand curling into a fist against the tablecloth. His voice dropped low, his German sharpening into a hiss. Asterisk. Careful, girl. You forget your place. Asterisk. Amara didn't flinch. Her shoulders remained square, her posture tall, her tray still tucked neatly under her arm as though she had all the time in the world. She let the silence stretch before she replied, her voice even softer, but all the more cutting for it. On the contrary. Tonight, it seems you've forgotten yours. The words cracked the air like thunder. Somewhere across the room, a guest let out an audible gasp. Others turned more openly now, abandoning pretense, their attention fixed entirely on the confrontation unfolding in the middle of the dining room. Victor's eyes narrowed, his arrogance shaken but not broken. He was not a man accustomed to losing face, especially not in public. His gaze flicked across the room, catching the eyes of strangers watching, then snapping back to Amara. His lips trembled with the weight of words he could not quite say. One of his associates, desperate to ease the growing tension, attempted a laugh. Come now, it's just. But Victor silenced him with a glare so sharp that the man stopped mid-word, his mouth snapping shut. The power dynamic at the table was shifting rapidly, and everyone could feel it. Victor's authority, built on wealth and arrogance, was crumbling in real time, while Amara's quiet strength filled the room with something undeniable. The pianist, regaining his composure, began playing again, though softly, as if unwilling to interrupt the electricity hanging in the air. Glasses clinked faintly as waiters in the distance continued moving, but all the attention had narrowed to this table, this moment, this battle of words. Victor leaned back slowly, forcing himself into a more relaxed posture, though his fists remained tight on the table. He smirked again, though it no longer reached his eyes. Do you think, he said in German, his voice almost trembling, that anyone here truly cares what a waitress has to say? Amara allowed herself the faintest smile. It was not mocking, not cruel, but calm, confident. Care? She repeated softly. No. But they hear me. And that is enough. The ripple those words sent across the room was visible in the subtle nods, the murmurs that grew louder, the approving smiles exchanged by diners who pretended at first not to notice but could no longer contain themselves. Victor's jaw tightened further, his face redder now, his arrogance battling with humiliation. He wanted to crush her, to silence her, to return to the comfort of superiority. But she had shifted the balance, and everyone could see it. Amara held his gaze a second longer, steady, unyielding, before stepping back. Her tray tucked under her arm, she prepared to leave, but she had already won more than she had set out to. His words, once weapons, had been turned against him. His laughter, once the loudest in the room, had died into silence. The entire restaurant held its breath, waiting, wondering whether the powerful man would reclaim control, or collapse under the weight of what had just happened. And in that heavy pause, Victor slammed his fist down on the table. The sound echoed through the room, glasses rattling in their stems, plates quivering. His voice roared in English, desperate now, dripping with outrage. Manager! This staff is insubordinate. I demand she be removed immediately. The tension broke like glass under pressure, and the whole room erupted in whispers. But Amara didn't move. She stood rooted, her gaze still calm, her dignity unshaken. The fight was only beginning. The manager hurried across the room, nearly tripping over himself in his rush to reach the table. His face was pale, his forehead damp with sweat, and his eyes darted nervously between Victor and Amara. He looked like a man already caught in a trap, knowing no matter what he said, he would anger someone with more power than him. He stopped beside the table, bowing slightly. Herr Reinhardt, please, what seems to be the problem? His voice was low, placating, every syllable trembling. Victor jabbed a finger toward Amara, his face flushed red, the veins at his temples bulging. This girl, this waitress, insulted me in front of my associates. She mocked me, challenged me. I demand she be removed at once. Do you hear me? At once! The manager turned to Amara, his mouth opening, but she stood tall, her tray tucked under her arm like a shield she didn't need. Her eyes met his, calm but steady, and before he could stammer out a response, another voice cut across the restaurant. It wasn't loud, but it carried authority that silenced even the whispers. Is there a problem here? The words came from a man seated several tables away, alone, his posture straight, his suit understated but impeccable. He was older, with silver hair brushed neatly back and sharp eyes that had the steady weight of a man who had spent his life commanding respect without asking for it. His presence seemed to fill the room, and the moment he rose to his feet, heads turned, conversations died, and the atmosphere shifted. Everyone recognized him. Klaus Richter, former ambassador, a diplomat whose name carried weight not just in Germany, but across Europe. The manager froze, caught mid-breath. Victor's head snapped toward the voice, his anger momentarily muted by recognition. Even he couldn't ignore the significance of the man who now approached. Ambassador Richter walked toward the table, his steps measured, unhurried, each one deliberate as though he wanted to give Victor time to realize just how badly the situation had already slipped from his control. He stopped at the table, resting his hands lightly on the back of a nearby chair, and fixed Victor with a gaze that was calm, piercing, and utterly unyielding. "I heard everything," he said in perfect German. His voice was steady, smooth, but with an edge of iron that cut deeper than shouting ever could. "And I must say, Herr Reinhardt, it is disgraceful. To belittle someone serving you, someone who clearly speaks your language with more fluency and intelligence than you have demonstrated tonight, is beneath even the worst of men." A ripple went through the restaurant, gasps audible now, murmurs swelling like a rising tide. Victor's face turned from red to an ugly shade of purple. He opened his mouth, but the ambassador continued, not allowing him the chance to speak. "You wear wealth as if it were armor, Reinhardt, but it seems to me it has only made you careless. Respect is not purchased with money. It is earned, and you have earned none tonight." The associates at the table sat frozen, unsure whether to defend Victor or pretend they weren't with him at all. The American swallowed hard, his face pale, while the Frenchman shifted uncomfortably, clearly wishing he were anywhere else. Around them, diners whispered, and though their words weren't clear, the approval in their tone was. Victor slammed his palm against the table again, his voice rising, raw with anger. "You don't know who you are speaking to. You think a man like me will be shamed by the words of a waitress and a washed-up politician?" His voice cracked slightly, and the desperation in it was like blood in the water. Amara remained still, her expression calm, her hands steady. She felt no need to add anything yet. The ambassador's words carried enough weight. But the dignity in her silence was its own weapon. She had faced men like Victor before, though never with an entire room watching. And now, for the first time, he wasn't simply insulting her, he was unraveling. The ambassador straightened slightly, his gaze unwavering. "Oh, I know exactly who I am speaking to," he replied. "I am speaking to a man who hides behind his fortune, mistaking fear for respect, arrogance for strength. But tonight, every person here has seen the truth. They've seen you revealed. And it will not be forgotten." The murmurs grew louder, now unmistakably in her favor. Words like shameful, disgrace, and well spoken floated through the air. Victor glanced around, realizing with growing horror that the audience he had sought all night now witnessed his humiliation. He pointed again at Amara, his hand trembling. "This is not finished," he hissed, but the threat rang hollow. Finally Amara spoke. Her voice was calm, not raised, but it cut cleanly through the noise. "Everyone here already knows who you are, Herr Reinhardt. But tonight they also know what you are." The words hung in the air like a blade suspended by a thread. Victor's mouth opened, then closed again. His associates dropped their gazes, unable to meet his eyes. The ambassador inclined his head slightly toward Amara, his tone warm but firm. "Your German is impeccable, Fräulein. Better than his, I dare say." The restaurant erupted, not into applause, not yet, but into a low wave of approving laughter and nods. People leaned toward one another, smiling, murmuring agreement. For once, the sound wasn't laughter at her expense but in recognition of her strength. Victor's chair scraped violently against the floor as he stood. His towering figure loomed, his fists trembling at his sides. But even standing, even with all his wealth and power, he looked small compared to the woman who hadn't raised her voice, who hadn't moved an inch, and the man whose authority was carved from a lifetime of earned respect. His lips moved, but no words came. His empire of arrogance was crumbling in real time, witnessed by every pair of eyes in the room. He had wanted to display dominance, to humiliate, to prove his superiority. Instead, he had been stripped bare, exposed not by shouting, not by force, but by dignity and truth. The ambassador's words still lingered in the air, echoing like a verdict: respect cannot be bought, and Victor Reinhardt had nothing left to stand on. And in that silence, with the weight of the entire room pressing down on him, Victor realized he was already defeated. The silence that followed stretched so long that even the faint clinking of cutlery seemed intrusive. Victor's breath came heavy, his chest rising and falling as if he had just run a race he could not win. He stood at the head of the table, fists trembling, face blotched red, and yet he could not summon the words to strike back. Every second that passed deepened the humiliation. His empire of arrogance, built over years of unchecked power, was being stripped layer by layer under the weight of one waitress's calm composure and a diplomat's measured words. Amara did not move. She did not need to. Her stillness was power itself, unshaken and deliberate, her eyes fixed firmly on him without hostility, only clarity. She did not see a giant. She saw a man exposed. She saw the silence around him, the shame pooling in the eyes of his companions, the quiet disapproval radiating from every corner of the restaurant. Finally she spoke. Her voice was level, controlled, neither loud nor trembling. It cut through the air sharper than the slam of his fist had. Everyone here knows who you are, Herr Reinhardt. But tonight they also know what you are. The words struck harder than any raised voice could have. A ripple of murmurs surged through the room. Diners whispered to one another, glancing not at her, but at him. A few tilted their heads in disapproval, others smirked knowingly. Even those who had not understood the German caught the tone, the posture, the undeniable shift in power. Victor's jaw tightened, but his glare faltered. He wanted to roar, to reclaim the dominance slipping from his grasp, but the weight of every eye in the room held him pinned to the ground. To shout now would not restore him. It would bury him further. The ambassador straightened, his presence steady as ever. He let the silence hang, then added with cold precision: "Respect is not bought with wealth, Reinhardt. It is earned. And tonight you have earned only shame." Those words landed like a gavel strike. It was a judgment, final and absolute. And for the first time all evening, Victor's associates turned fully away from him. The Frenchman studied the tablecloth as though the weave of the fabric had suddenly become fascinating. The American cleared his throat and mumbled something inaudible, unwilling to be seen standing with a man so publicly diminished. Amara shifted slightly, adjusting the tray under her arm. She moved with the ease of someone untouched by the storm, her dignity unbroken. Then she leaned forward just slightly, her eyes still on Victor, her voice steady as steel. "Next time you mock someone in a language you believe they cannot speak, pray they cannot speak it better than you." The impact was devastating. The room, filled with restrained silence until now, broke into soft laughter, into approving nods and murmurs. It wasn't the laughter that had followed Victor's cruelty earlier, brittle and forced. This was warmer, sharper, fueled by recognition of justice delivered before their very eyes. Victor's lips moved again, but this time no sound came out. His hand, still trembling, slowly dropped from a fist to lie flat against the table. The sound of forks and knives being set down filled the air as people abandoned their meals to watch him unravel. The very attention he had once basked in now seared like fire. The ambassador inclined his head politely toward Amara. "Well said, Fräulein," he murmured, then turned his gaze back to Victor. "You may find, Herr Reinhardt, that fortunes can collapse faster than they are built. But the memory of this moment? That will linger." Victor's face twitched, his eyes darting wildly around the room as if searching for an ally. None appeared. His associates wouldn't meet his gaze. The other diners looked at him as one looks at a crumbling statue, once impressive, now pitiful. He sank slowly back into his chair, his bravado drained, his shoulders sagging under the weight of humiliation. For the first time in years, silence clung to him like a shroud. Amara gathered the empty glasses from the table with the same quiet precision she had brought at the beginning of the evening. Her movements were steady, deliberate, not rushed. She did not need to gloat, nor did she need to say another word. The victory was already hers. As she turned to leave, the whispers followed her, not in mockery but in admiration. "Did you hear her German?" someone whispered near the window. "Flawless." Another leaned in closer to their partner, murmuring, "She didn't even raise her voice." Incredible. Her steps carried her through the aisles, past tables of strangers whose eyes now softened with quiet respect. She did not smile, not outwardly, but inside her chest a calm warmth spread. She had not planned this, had not sought it, but she had faced the weight of cruelty and turned it into silence. Behind her, Victor sat hollow, his empire of arrogance shattered. He lifted his wine glass with a shaking hand, but when he tried to drink, the liquid sloshed against the rim. His once booming voice was gone, replaced by a silence more damning than any insult. Amara disappeared into the kitchen doors, but her words lingered in the air like a ghost that would not fade. The ambassador resumed his seat, lifting his glass with calm dignity. The pianist in the corner began to play again, the music soft, steady, as if stitching the moment into memory. Conversation slowly returned, but the energy in the room had shifted. Where there had been fear of wealth and power, now there was a quiet recognition. Arrogance had been undone by dignity, cruelty defeated by truth. And Victor Reinhardt, a man who once believed the world bent under his voice, sat with nothing left to say. Sometimes, the sharpest weapon isn't wealth, or power, or titles, it's the voice of the one you tried to silence.